Welcome. You're watching Beyond the Headline. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. How many of us are guilty of ignoring the safety messages at the beginning of a flight? We may look curiously at the crew member demonstrating what to do in case of a serious situation, but let's be honest, no one really pays attention. I'm sure the passengers of SpiceJet flight number SG954 would have wished they were better prepared. This flight that took off from Mumbai to Durgapur last Sunday landed during extreme turbulence. The turbulence was so high that it left 14 passengers injured, 11 of them reportedly hospitalized and 2 in the ICU. Some have reportedly suffered brain and spinal injuries. Now, I want to take a second here and just play out for you the raw footage from inside the aircraft to give you a sense of how terrifying those few minutes were.
हेलो यहाँ थोड़ा आइस दीजिए ना
सर सीट बेल्ट लगा के बैठना सब लोग सीट बेल्ट लगा लीजिए मत खोलो एक हाथ से ऐसे पकड़ के रखो आपको समझ नहीं आ रहा है क्या
Now, since then, the DGCA, that's the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, has ordered a probe, derostered the crew and grounded the aircraft. Disturbing visuals that you have just seen give us just a sense of what went on. Now, the question is, what went on and what went wrong on this flight? Was this an error on the part of the pilots, or did the passengers not wear their seatbelts when asked to? Now, according to the DGCA preliminary report, the flight faced severe turbulence during landing and flew into a storm called the Nor'wester or the Kala Baisakhi. This is a local severe storm that is found seasonally in this region. The DGCA report goes on to say that during the storm, the autopilot function of the aircraft got disengaged, and for about a couple of minutes, the plane was being flown manually by the pilots. The turbulence at this point was so severe that oxygen panels opened up and masks fell down. A few seat hands, rests and overhead panels were damaged, and a lock of one of the overhead bins was found broken. Passengers say that luggage from the overhead bins even fell on their heads. Now, there are a couple of versions of what could have gone wrong. One version or interpretation of the events is that this grave danger to all on board could have been caused due to an error of judgment from the pilots. Should they have chosen not to fly into the thunderstorm and found a different way? Could the flight have been diverted instead of continuing its descent? Now, the other version of events is that possibly passengers did not listen to or follow instructions when they were asked to wear their seatbelts. SpiceJet, in its statement after the incident, has said, and I quote, multiple announcements asking flyers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened were made. Now, I must make it clear, we're in no way preempting the final investigation that will follow and reveal what actually happened. But it is important to understand this incident from the point of view of passenger safety. As the number of domestic air passengers continues to grow, we must be sure that the right checks and balances are in place in the system. And this incident truly raises some crucial questions. For one, were the pilots adequately informed of the severity of the turbulence they were facing? Were there enough weather warnings in place beforehand? Why did the autopilot disengage, and is that standard process in this situation? Did passengers not listen to instructions and put on their seatbelts when asked to? And was there negligence of any kind on behalf of the airline. We're going to be speaking about this in detail to the experts. I'm joined now by Ajay Attorney. He's founder and editor of Live from a Lounge. Parvez Damania, aviation expert, is with me on the show. I'm speaking with M.R. Sivaraman. He's former Director General of Civil Aviation. S.B. Sharma, ex-General Manager, Airports Authority of India, is also with us. And I'm also speaking this evening with Captain Amit Singh, founder of Safety Matters Foundation. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sivaraman, let me just begin with your overview of what we know so far. And of course, investigations will go through. But this essential question of whether it was simply, unavoidable, or could have passengers and the crew been saved from this terrifying experience?
The experience of the SpiceJet flight is not a one-off incident. There has been several such incidents before also. I think a couple of years ago, Air India flights also had similar incidents. What has made it more serious is because the passengers got injured. In many of these incidents, flight into turbulence, passengers don't get injured, although there is a lot of discomfort because of the flight, oscillating this way and that way, people get frightened. But normally, the pilot informs the passengers to be careful. Even while he is in a cruising altitude, he says, please keep your seat belts on. Normally, this is what the captain always says. But basically, I have found in my experience, I have flown a number of times with passengers inside the aircraft while as DGCA. Passengers simply ignore these instructions from the pilot. And even while landing, even before the aircraft lands, they remove the seat belts. So basically, I would say passengers do not adhere to safety instructions as is required in aircraft. Now, secondly, the pilots generally know that they may enter into turbulence during monsoon seasons and during extreme summers. You can get turbulent weather. And this usually happens, and generally pilots are aware of it. Therefore, even before they enter into turbulence, they warn the passengers to keep their seatbelts on. And the seatbelt signs also come on. Recently, I was on a flight from Varanasi to Chennai, and there was turbulence, and the pilot informed us 10 minutes before he entered turbulent area that there will be turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts on.
Okay.
So the pilots are also aware of it. The passengers should also cooperate. And generally, the weather monitoring system also gives some indication that there may be turbulence.
So what you're saying is absolutely right, that there are systems in place, and hence the question, were these systems then not functioning efficiently? Because you're right, that turbulence has been reported earlier, but to this extent, people have spinal injuries. 2 people landed in an ICU. What kind of a turbulence could have had this impact? And is it as simple as people just didn't listen and didn't wear their seatbelts? I'm going to go to Parvez Damania on this. Parvez, can you hear me? Okay, he's not getting my audio. We'll fix that and come back to him. Ajay Attorney, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on this question, now, Mr. Sivaraman is saying, prima facie, it seems like passengers were not listening. And we heard that clip. I played out that clip with all the sound on it, where you can hear the crew saying, please put on your seatbelt, please put on your seatbelt. But is it as simple as that? Because some passengers have reported that luggage fell from the overhead bins onto their heads. And the seatbelts tore in some case because there was that much turbulence. What is your take on this issue?
So, Tamanna, I think there are a mix of issues from both ends, which caused eventually what happened on the unfortunate flight that day. First and foremost, from what I am reading and what I've been seeing over the past 2-3 days, a lot of other flights basically held over the weather or diverted on that day while SpiceJet decided to fly right into the weather. By some accounts of some SpiceJet folk, it is coming out that they say that it looked like mild turbulence and hence they went for it, while everyone else in the vicinity, including an Indigo flight, I think went over to Guwahati, it got diverted. A lot of other flights went for diversions, but in this case, SpiceJet basically flew right into the weather. That's number one. Number two, you're very correct in saying that the passengers did not follow crew instructions fully. Usually, it's always a good idea whenever you're seated anyways to keep your seatbelt fastened. In this case, obviously, that did not happen. And the impact of the turbulent weather that the pilots flew into, advertently or inadvertently, we don't know. That's something that the AAIB will find out. They really kind of obviously, when you're flying into such violent weather, the seatbelts could have come off as well, because it was an old aircraft. Maybe it was not, the seatbelts were not maintained properly. But yeah, a lot of passengers were not maybe wearing the seatbelts as well, because it's a good practice to ideally wear your seatbelts at all points. But perhaps a lot of passengers did not wear the seatbelts. Coming to the part about the structural damage to the plane, I see visuals where people who were not held together by their seatbelts, whether they were not wearing it or whether the seatbelts came off, hit their head on the roof panels of the aircraft, of the overhead lockers. And yeah, obviously, a combination of these reasons, both from the passengers and as well as the airline end, caused all the damage that happened to the passengers, I believe. Not just one.
Right. So the point about whether passengers were wearing seatbelts or not will need to be investigated, whether it was their fault. But, you know, the fact is that when you're landing, can the crew check each and every passenger, check if they're actually wearing seatbelts? That sometimes is a difficult task. I completely agree that sometimes Indian passengers can be not very disciplined. But is it enough to put the blame at their door? Let me get Mr. S.B. Sharma into this. What kind of a situation could create such severe turbulence? And would that information not be available with that crew?
As Mr. Sivaraman has already informed, and everybody knows that pilot, when he's flying, they have the radar on their board, which gives them advance information. So that information was available with the pilot. Now it is the matter of investigation. Once investigation is complete, it will be known whether the severity of the weather, which is given the indication on their radar, was he should have avoided or he should have continued. But it seems that the severity was too much. So the information is always available with the pilot. He has to take a call whether he has to hold or he has to continue.
In that case, can you say it's an error in judgment? Mr. Parvez Damania, what is your take on this issue? Because now there are two versions which are appearing. One is that was it an error of judgment on the side of the pilot? They perhaps should have not chosen to fly into turbulence and thinking it could be mild. Or was it simply that passengers didn't listen to instructions? If they had, perhaps they wouldn't have been injured.
First and foremost, let's not call this an incident. It is not an incident. The definition of incident and accident is very clearly defined, and this comes under the accident category. The injuries were very serious. 2 people are in ICU, and the change of the G-force must have caused huge amount of damage to the passengers, and there could have been very serious injuries. Another thing, these aircrafts are very advanced. This is a very high technology aircraft. And these are equipped with very advanced weather radars that can show you from miles ahead what kind of weather you're heading in. So I think the pilot must have known what situation he's heading in. He could have taken care on that front. And another thing, if this happened little time before landing, well before certain amount of time the seat belt comes on. And no, it is correct that the air hostesses go through the entire aircraft, see whether all the passengers are wearing seat belts, and also check if the seats are upright, traitors up. So I think all these precautions should have been taken. And another thing, what I find most shocking is after this aircraft was landed, and after some time this aircraft was cleared to fly off. So all the evidence that should have been collected by the DGC and the organization has all gone. How was this aircraft allowed to take off again is very shocking. Who cleared the aircraft to take off again? And it happened at night. So at night, they should just kept the aircraft there. There should have been proper investigation, because after this aircraft is released. And I think the damage to the passengers was huge. I saw on the BBC that one passenger has reported what kind of damages occurred. So I think a very serious investigation should take place, and the cockpit voice recorder will give us all the information that is required because everything is recorded inside. So I think we just have to wait and see how the incident occurs, but this incident is very, very serious. People could have been hurt very badly. How can you imagine the G-force, the up and down that has occurred, that all the lockers opened up,
Yes.
the baggages fell down, and some of the passengers who were not wearing seatbelt were just tossed apart. You know, so it's quite shocking.
No, but here's the seatbelt theory.
And I
Two
think
things
the
which are
government
two
needs to
things.
take-
Two things with the seatbelt theory. That one, passengers are reporting that even those who wear seatbelts, their seatbelts just pretty much tore. There was that much turbulence. And secondly, that there was luggage falling
But
from
that's
the
what I'm saying. Can
overhead
you
bins on
imagine
their
the
head.
G-force
So even
up
if you
and
wore
down?
a seatbelt, how would you protect yourself?
Okay. No, see, the other thing that nobody's talking about is what kind of damage could have been caused to the aircraft. There could have been damage if this kind of G-force fluctuation up and down occurred. The plane must have rocked so badly, so the aircraft could not have been cleared or should not have been cleared till there was a total check if there's any damage on the airframe, there's any serious damage on the aircraft. And same night the aircraft was cleared, I'm told, and allowed to fly back, which is quite shocking. So you can imagine there must have been huge damage or could have been huge damage to the aircraft, and that investigation should have been taken place before releasing the aircraft, but the aircraft was just released. So which is again shocking, you know, and because of the G-force, people's spines could have been damaged very, very badly. So it's shocking that the fluctuation, the G-force was huge. Now only the cockpit voice recorder will give us the exact position of what really happened.
So, you know, in all of these factors that we're talking about, and Captain Amit Singh, let me bring you in here. Please explain to us why the autopilot went off. Is that standard process? What changes when, you know, the pilots had to go manual and fly the plane manually for a full 2 minutes?
So, talking about the technicalities of the automation, the aircraft has a limitation. Boeing 737 has a limitation of G-forces, which means within, if you're flying within the limitation, the aircraft is safe. Beyond that, safety is not assured. The maximum G, positive G, as per the operator's manual is plus 2.5, whereas the aircraft experienced 2.64, which is beyond the positive G-force. Negative G-force is -1. The aircraft went up to -1.3. So the aircraft exceeded both the G limits. We don't know how long did the G limit sustain, but the logic of the automation is if the G forces are beyond certain limits, then the automation switches off or trips, basically. It cannot handle so much load. And basically, it's an indication for the pilots that the automation cannot take so much. You handle the aircraft. So now it comes to the pilots who are in for a surprise that automation is off. And how do they react to that, to the control surfaces? Like if you're having a positive G, aircraft is going up, do they react violently, push the aircraft down, which means they are increasing the G force. So how smooth are they in handling? That is all dependent on the past training of high altitude upset recovery, which is now mandatory by the UN body and the DGCA. So this is what happens when the automation fails. So there is a logic behind it. Another thing, if I may add, the aircraft is designed to fly, which means that everything is kind of very scientific. You talk about luggage falling and people getting hurt. There is a limit to the luggage. Why is it 7 kgs? Why is it not 8 kgs or 10 kgs that is permitted in the hand carriage? So there is a limit that if somebody gets the luggage falls on somebody's head, so it should not cause that grievous injuries. But if you have seen people carry 10 kgs, more than 10 kgs, there is no check of the size and the weight of the hand luggage. So ideally, initially, when the aircraft were built, the hat racks were open. There was no lid on it to cover and close it. So there was a logic because you're supposed to carry only light items. The rest you're supposed to check in. So the airlines does not control it. They're supposed to control as per the DGCA regulations. So this is a basically snapshot of the prevailing safety culture in the aviation industry in India. which is at a pathological level, which means the bottommost, that we will not do anything for safety unless somebody sees us or catches us. That's the bottommost.
That's a
topmost
shocking statement. That's a shocking statement. The reason that we wanted to pick up this issue on the show is because that's the very question, isn't it? Are we safe when we fly? Are we safe in Indian skies? Mr. Sivaraman, you want to come in on some of the observations that have been made? And especially whether the choice to continue to fly into this thunderstorm was an incorrect one.
No, I would just want to say that Mr. Parvez Damania very rightly stated that this aircraft should not have left the ground. And why it was cleared, who cleared it is a very, very serious
Correct, sir.
issue.
Correct, sir.
And we checked. Number two, when the aircraft has exceeded its G forces, then necessarily it should have been grounded and checked. There is the DFDR available, digital flight data recorder in all these aircraft. They could have been removed and they would have been removed and it would have been checked. Before the DFDR had been examined, this flight should not been allowed to take off from the airport. Number two, as it has been stated, the modern radars are capable of detecting all these disturbances. So one has to see whether the pilots were aware of the severity of the disturbance and whether they consciously entered the area of turbulence or whether they could have avoided it. If they were already on a descent mode and they had already entered the turbulent area and they were in no position to divert to any other airfield, that would also be revealed by investigation as well as from the DFDR at what particular point of time in its flight the aircraft entered into severe turbulence. Now, as far as the passengers are concerned, I find it a little difficult to accept that the seat belts broke because the seat belts are tested to very high Gs before they are installed in the aircraft. I have myself experienced 8.5 G in a fighter aircraft. I have flown in a fighter aircraft in various combat conditions, and I know what kind of G forces that a man experiences. Of course, I was wearing a G suit, but still at a point of time, I thought I would get knocked out. So as far as the passengers are concerned, anything above 1 G, they will start feeling it. And probably the pilots are also aware that while entering into the disturbed area, the aircraft may be subject to severe G forces. So we'll have to examine all these things. Of course, the DGCA promptly grounds the pilot, and that is the first action they take, which may probably sometimes be demoralizing to the pilot also if he had taken the right action. But I won't criticize the DGCA on this, but certainly they should not have allowed this aircraft to take off.
No, so who is responsible for making sure that the aircraft should not have taken off?
I'm coming to that. Now, with all these private airlines flying, of course, now there are only 4 or 5 or 6 of them. The DGCA should be more alert. The DGCA's presence should be felt everywhere. Unfortunately, what is happening now, I was one of the miserable persons to have got into the DGCA after I had got a flight license. Otherwise, I would have never been a DGCA and never wanted to be one. I was taken off from the Commerce Ministry. Now, as far as the DGCAs are concerned, they are brought in from all kinds of areas. Somebody is a dentist, he is brought in as a DGCA. Somebody is an expert in education, he is brought in as a DGCA. In spite of the fact there are IAS officers who are qualified in aeronautical engineering with even PhDs in aeronautical. They are not posted there, but somebody else is posted there. So this kind of a posting of officers who are not familiar with the aircraft, even if they are not familiar, they should also take interest in the job in which they have been deputed, for the job to which they have been deputed. I used to sit with mechanics in the Bombay hangars when they were opening up the engines. You ask anyone, I think Damania knows it very well. I used to sit in the hangar and sit with the mechanics to see how his engine is mounted on the aircraft.
This is shocking. This is shocking, Mr. Sivaraman, and I have to underline this for our viewers. Now, Mr. Sivaraman saying that the right people with the right qualifications are not necessarily those in the DGCA. You're saying someone who's a dentist can be in the DGCA. You want to come in on this, Captain Amit Singh, because you're talking about safety in Indian skies.
Well, yes, that is a big issue, and even the FAA in their IASA audit has made an observation that the DGCA should be a technically qualified person. The biggest shocker would be the current head of the Director General of Accident Investigation Bureau is a joint DG from DGCA posted maybe for 3 months, but the person has a chartered accountancy background. So the DG of the Accident Investigation Bureau has not seen an aircraft from inside, maybe only as a passenger, but not technically qualified or close to it, because the field is totally different. From the background is from an admin side and from a chartered accountancy. So even though there are so many qualified people within DGCA who have flight safety expertise, but people were not chosen for this job. So what sort of culture or message are we spreading in the industry? This is totally demoralizing for people. Why I say the generative culture is not prevailing. In a generative culture, everybody feels responsible for their safety and the safety of others. It is not.
Sir, you are saying it's demoralizing for people in the industry. I think it's terrifying for passengers. Ajay, you know, some of these revelations are truly concerning. I mean, of course, we need to know what happened in this particular case and get to the bottom of it. But here, the debate has been reduced to, did the passengers wear their seatbelts or not? And should they be blamed for that? The rot is much deeper.
Yeah, I agree, Tamanna. The rot is much deeper.
No, but I think the entire fleet should...
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Damania, go ahead.
Just one sec. Yes. Okay. Parvez, go ahead.
No, I think... see, I'll tell you something. The airlines have to self-regulate. It's impossible for the DGCA to be everywhere. The airlines have to maintain their own standards, not cut corner, and run the engineering department in a very disciplined manner. Every airline has a QCM, a quality control manager, who reports to the CEO. He has to be hauled up and check with the QCM what is wrong. See, again, I'm telling you, the airlines have to improve their engineering standards. They have to self-regulate themselves instead of depending upon DGCA to regulate everything. Now, if the airlines cut
no, so
costs
one sec,
and
Mr.
cut
Damania,
standards,
are you saying that we also need to check if the airline cut corners? Because that's also a very important charge. That's a very serious charge.
Of course, that is it. That the airlines have to maintain. See, the airlines, in order to give competitive fares, should not cut any costs as far as the engineering and maintenance is concerned. The airlines on their own should maintain the highest engineering standards that are, and DGCA should overlook. It's impossible for DGCA to be there everywhere for every aircraft. Again, I'm telling you something. These aircrafts are very, very high-tech aircrafts. The chances of aircraft mistakes are very remote. So again, actually what we should do, you should do a follow-up story after some time after the report comes up. We do television shows on when the incident occurred, but later what are the findings, that should be revealed. After some time, people forget till the next incident.
No, absolutely. We will follow up once the findings are out, and we're keen to know what the findings finally are. So which is why we've started with that qualifier. We are not pointing fingers today. We're not saying you did wrong, but we're highlighting how this incident raises some very serious questions. Captain Singh wanted to come in.
You should call somebody from
Captain Singh wanted to come in.
Yes. SpiceJet also on the show, you know.
Yes, what? Yes, Captain Singh.
There was an accident last year, 7th June 2021, Vistara Boeing 737, just south of Durgapur, went into a similar turbulent situation. A couple of people were hurt. The incident or the accident report is out on those recommendations implemented, because I filed RTIs with AIB that what do you do with the recommendations? They said we just pass it on to the stakeholders. So there is no follow-up action, or the loop is not closed. We have something called a safety management system. And the system is self-regulatory. The job of DGCA is oversight and do audits, inspections. If the system is working fine, then all these things will not have happened. First thing is, when the aircraft is dispatched, the pilots are briefed about the weather. And we have a system of flight following, wherein there is a dispatcher on ground who is tracking the flight and the weather. The 2021 accident report recommended that there should be a MET officer in the operations control center of each airline, so that they can track all these cells and advise the pilots in advance that you're likely to
No, so
encounter.
who is going to ensure all this? Mr. Sivaraman, it's a DGCA's job, right? Who's going to ensure all of this?
Let me add a few points to what Mr. Tamanna had stated. I had introduced what is known as the Air Safety Audit when I was the person who actually was responsible for privatization of the Indian skies. After a year, we introduced what is known as the Air Safety Audit. Each one of these private airlines had to be audited periodically and randomly also by the DGCA for observing safety precautions on the engineering side, on the flight side. That's why we had also a flight inspection directorate under an air marshal. So these things are there. And see, there is, of course, the fundamental responsibility of the company which is running the airline. It is they who have to see that they run the airline properly because that is the bread and butter. Now, with this kind of an incident happening with the SpiceJet, nobody would like to fly in the SpiceJet at all. So these are things which the companies also have to manage. The DGCA has got full responsibility to look into these things. Let me also say one thing. There has been repeated complaints from the DGCA that they are not adequately staffed. Considering the volume of work that they have now, their staffing pattern is as it was when I was there. Probably they have increased it by a few number of people. So it is very essential that the DGCA is also adequately staffed because it's an officer-oriented organization. There are no clerks there. It is all engineers who are qualified from IITs and regional engineering colleges with electronic engineering. They have to recruit a large number of them. It is safety which is required, which is very important, not the economy here. And repeatedly I've told them we can increase the license fees, etc., and collect money. But even in my time, the government was reluctant to give staff. But ultimately I had to fight my way through and got some extra staff. I think DGCA is also very highly inadequately staffed.
Okay, so you can't have a situation where your regulator is inadequately staffed. You don't really, know for sure why an aircraft which went through this turbulence was allowed to take off again. The story is beginning to sound quite terrifying apart from those few minutes of turbulence which unfortunately these passengers also faced. But, at the end of it, and Mr. Sharma, would you like to come in with closing comments on everything we've discussed? Where does the buck stop? The average Indian now has a greater propensity to fly, especially domestic passengers, and the number of domestic passengers is increasing. We're moving to a space when airlines are cutting costs in the sense that you want an aisle seat, you pay for it. You want a window seat, you pay for it. You want to carry more hand baggage, you pay for it. Check-in baggage, you pay for it. All of that is fine. But what about safety?
Let me say, Mr. Sharma may not be able to say this openly. Let me say that.
Yes, sir.
The buck stops with the aviation minister. And the buck stops with the DGCA. DGCA is a statutory authority. He is completely independent of the minister. I was totally independent of the minister. I never permitted the minister to intervene, but I was totally dependent upon the ministry for staff and for my equipment. Mr. Sharma will not be able to say this. I am saying this. The buck stops with the minister. The minister has to take adequate interest in the staffing of the DGCA, in the training of the DGCA, and ensure that the DGCA functions autonomously and that the DGCA is a person who takes interest in his job, not a person who comes there, occupies a seat for a couple of years, visits here and there, and then goes away to some other job. He has to sit with the pilots, he has to sit with the engineers, understand everything of the aircraft. I used to be in the simulators of all the aircraft that were flying there for at least 2 hours, 3 hours, and I used to fly it myself in the simulator. Many of the pilots have taught me to fly these aircraft. That is how I functioned as a DGCA, because I took interest in it. And I wanted to get out of it also. People were saying, then people can throw me out at that particular point of time. But I was...
No, but that's a bold statement. The buck stops with the Civil Aviation Ministry, which has also ordered a probe. They've ordered a probe. I hope officials in the ministry, the minister is watching this and seeing how serious the situation is. We cannot have a place where Indian flyers don't feel safe or are not safe, even if they don't know what is really going on. Just to round it off, Ajay, the debate we started with, and one of the questions we started with was, are passengers at fault for perhaps not listening to the instructions to wear their seatbelt or not looking at the seatbelt sign? After all of what we've discovered and uncovered in this conversation, do you think that that question still has merit?
I'll just add one sentence. The present civil aviation minister Mr. Madhura Sindhia was my minister.
Sir, his son is currently the minister. Yes, Ajay.
Yeah, so Tamanna, I think, like I said, the error happened on both sides. Clearly, this was not an equipment error. So the aircraft is made for battle situations. So the aircraft would have not flown into the storm by itself. Whether it was passengers or whether it was pilots or whether it was a mix of both, we'll find out. But yes, generally, at all points of time, advisable that passengers wear the seatbelts, even when they're flying.
Does the crew not have to enforce it? Does the crew not have to enforce it? I agree. Passengers should have the sense to do it themselves.
Absolutely.
But
They
in
have
this
to enforce
case,
it.
They know better.
Yes, the crew has to enforce it. The crew does enforce it. The crew does a visual inspection every time the seatbelt sight comes on. A member of the cabin crew is supposed to walk by. And
Don't
check.
hide. When the member of the cabin crew walks by and asks if you've put your seat belt, I've seen people do this. Don't say yes, I've done it when you haven't actually. It's for you. Wear your seat belt.
For their own safety.
Wear your seat belt like you do it while driving, not because someone will fine you. I will have to wrap this here. I will have to wrap the big story here, but I want to thank all of you for joining us, for speaking so candidly. Mr. Sivaraman, special thank you to you for speaking candidly and shining light on what actually could have been going on. We'll wait for that report. We'll follow up on that report. I'll take a very short break at this time.